Revelations. Welcome to video 8 of my Antidote to Tyranny. This will also be the equivalent to chapter 17 within Graham K. Griffiths' book Behold Jerusalem, and as such will feature in my Albion Landscape video series, which is the serialisation of Graham's book. This is the first part of 5 of Graham's own work and the serialisation of the items that he was forced to leave out of his original book, Behold Jerusalem, back in 2003, although he says 2004. And so this was written 14 years after that date, back in 2018. These revelations refer to graphical sexual innuendo and practices, so I've had to really lock this down and put it as adults only. Some of the subjects covered within this series of 5 are alluded to within the main book in chapters 1 through to 16. But go into a little bit more detail within this book, within this serialisation of his revelations. After going through these revelations several times in the production of this video, I will at the end be releasing a 6th video within this set to actually put my views over what has been revealed and what can be said about the Albion Zodiac and what I believe its true nature is. I will now pass you over to the words of Graham K. Griffiths.
Behold Jerusalem, by Graham K. Griffiths. The Missing Revelations. My book Behold Jerusalem, 2004, described my stumbled over discovery to the effect that the entire coastline of England, Wales, and Northern Ireland had somehow miraculously conspired to mirror the 12 signs of the zodiac, staggeringly surmounted by a 48-mile-tall depiction of Christ crucified, and in so doing had likewise mirrored, albeit on an even more gigantic scale, those famous landscape zodiacal signs we today refer to as the Glastonbury Zodiac. Discovered by Catherine Maltwood in the 1930s, her 10-mile diameter circle of star giants becoming the perfectly placed eye of my own 155 by 70-mile giant of Pisces. Unlike Maltwood's figures, my own giants also had uncanny place name verification of their presence underfoot. Take just the Suffolk town of Eye. It happens to mark the very eye of the colossal 140 by 150 mile figure of Sagittarius. Fascinating too, I was to find that my own star giants were also near carbon copies of another set of terrestrial star giants, found in the 1970s by members of the Pendragon Society, and located in the Preseli Mountains of Wales. Proof in triplicate, at least to me, that I was not insane. However, my original manuscript of over 300,000 words had to be brutally chopped to nearly half on the advice of my then literary agent, and in doing so much information was deleted. Ever since I have worried that I have failed in my duty to tell all I knew of this wonder. Thus my friend Lawrence Main, knowing something of that which was lost, and feeling that such might be too important not to tell, has kindly given me this opportunity to finally unburden my conscience. Thanks, Lawrence. Article 1 Pisces, fish within fish within fish. The first cut I had to make to the manuscript was to fill it out the Dartmoor gut of Pisces, and wherein I had found the proof of that great 155-mile-long Whopper's Last Supper, this a swallowed sprat, albeit itself still some 16 miles long from nose to tail, and as such creating a charming image of a fish within a fish. Pisces then, and which fills the entire southwestern peninsula, was one of the first 4 giants I saw leap out at me from my newly unwrapped Reader's Digest World Atlas on Christmas morning, 1962, a fish shape so striking that these 55 years on I still can't understand why it's not referred to as one by every BBC One weather forecaster, especially Michael Fish. In fact, so clear to me is its coastal shape alone, that it was only due to my pernickety nature that I went the few extra miles inland in order to dig out its buried head. This a simple 10-minute job with an Ordnance Survey map, for Mother Nature, seemingly aided and abetted by the subliminally guided hand of man, has made the whole thing child's play to discover. However, 2 years into what was to become my 10-year writing up of my discovery of all 12 zodiacal giants found in Britain's floor plan, and in effort to try and put some bread on the table, my real job being a professional artist, I decided upon a painting expedition to Dartmoor with hopefully an exhibition to follow. But not knowing the moor too well, I thought it prudent to firstly study as many books as I could on this vast area so as to earmark the locations where I'd like to go and paint. And yes, this my planned attempt to earn some much-needed cash was equally an excuse to give my brain a rest from the fantastical stuff I'd been struggling to make written sense of. But there was to be one Dartmoor reference book that was to grab me by the collar and drag me right back to behold Jerusalem. The book was Dartmoor's Greatest Walk by Bill Ransom, and upon its first page was a map of this said walk, a walk of some 50 miles, and seeing this lined route was like being slapped in the face with a wet haddock, for it was, although Ransom didn't mention it, the perfect outline of a fish situated smack bang in the Dartmoor belly of my already discovered Piscean Whopper, and a chapter 1 thought I'd already put to bed. And yes, I got further reeled in when I then read that this Dartmoor fish had been originally marked out under the orders of King Henry III, no less, and who in 1240 had 12, interesting number, nights perambulate his forest chase of Dartmoor so to fix its boundary for all time. For a future time when crazy blokes looked for terrestrial star giants perhaps. Okay, and with my tongue now taken out of my cheek, I thought I'd take a closer look at this old King Henry. Seems he was a learned chap with a strong interest in all things Arthurian, and his private tutor in such matters was one Walter Map. Maps, the very things that had driven me to hunt constellations where none should be. Anyway, I couldn't help but to wonder if it was under the guidance of this tutor, well versed as he probably was in the so-called mysterious matter of Britain, that Henry ordered that a fish out of water be massively mapped out, this via that very Arthurian gesture of 12 nights. Albeit under the pretext of merely marking out a king's land grab, in the very belly of that greater fish I'd already denoted as Pisces. If so, such would have been a lovely nod and a wink gesture towards his knowing too that his realm of Britain was, as teacher Merlin had earlier told King Arthur, a gigantic terrestrial round table, wheel of the zodiac, to quest around it being in truth the pursuit of the truth of oneself, the Holy Grail no less. Enchanting thoughts and questions, but which today's historians would of course rightly dismiss out of hand amid riotous bellows of belly laughter. However, my own tutor in all of this, like Henry's own, has always been a good map, and with such to hand let's go fishing. In Walter Map's tutelage of Henry I'm sure he would have told of how King Arthur himself, whilst out questing for the ultimate truth, Grail, supposedly spent, Jonah-like, 3 days in the belly of a monstrous fish or whale. So in this voluminous Dartmoor gut of Britain's own Piscean monster perchance? Such a location would certainly have been on Arthur's doorstep, but should you be thinking that rock-strewn Dartmoor is the opposite to what a warm and slimy gut should be, I'd recommend casting an eye over the Bible's own story of Jonah, for his own sojourn of learning in the belly of the Leviathan is described as anything but a place of fishy entrails, but rather a location very much on dry land, yeah, and even rock-strewn too. I call then Jonah to the witness box, and ask him to describe it for himself. The waters encompassed me about, a peninsular location? Even to the soul, the depth closed me round about, the weeds, an allusion to seaweed or fish entrails, or exactly what he says the dense trees and undergrowth of a Dartmoor 2000 plus years ago were wrapped about my head. I went down to the bottoms of the mountains, undersea canyons, or the granite tors of the moor. The earth with her bars, tree trunks, was about me forever. Yet hast thou brought up my life from corruption, O Lord my God. Jonah 2 verses 5-6. * mine. Thank you, Jonah. But it's not only him who describes a hard landscape rather than a mess of squelchy guts as being the innards of a leviathan, as Job 2:41-24 seems to have it on good authority that these same innards were not what we'd normally expect. His Lord told him, his heart is as firm as a stone, as hard as a piece of the nether millstone. Even weapons can't hurt it. Slingstones are turned with him into stubble of a spear. He laugheth at the shaking, and this regarding the location the Leviathan haunts. Sharp stones are under him, he spreadeth sharp-pointed things upon the mires. Well, the geological heart of this Dartmoor fish is indeed granite, perfect material for millstones. And what with it being some 16 miles long to boot, let's not bother with those slingstones and spears either, eh? As for sharp-pointed things upon the mires, Dartmoor is strewn with granite boulders, glitter to the locals, which stick up out of its thin soil like the bones of a half-eaten fish of gigantic proportions, while its treacherous man and beast-swallowing mires are indeed still the stuff of local bar-room legend to this day. But should you be still uncomfortable with this fish out of water, I wonder if a small grin might flicker across your face when I mention that the word moor may itself be smiling, for the Welsh word for sea just so happens to be moor. So what the hell then am I now suggesting that Jonah 2 spent his 3 days in this Dartmoor gut of Britain's Pisces? Yep. Whether in the flesh, or in some spiritual or subconscious state, I feel it was, just as it was for Arthur too, the pair of 'em swallowed down the throat of this 155-mile-long landscaped fish of the heavens, a leviathan by any other name, in order to be initiated into the truth of themselves within the cosmos, likewise, to the cosmos inherent within themselves. And what better meaningful location to experience one's own inner truth than within this fish within a fish, which is Dartmoor's own gulped-down sprat? The imagery here is indeed fathoms deep, yet only a good Ordnance Survey map away. But of course you want more proof. I damn well knew I did too. If Jonah really was then swallowed down into the gut of this Dartmoor fish, which has itself been already swallowed down into the greater gut of Britain's colossal Pisces, I then asked myself where would he make his exit out of this inner sprat, once his 3 days were up, and assuming he'd passed the tests. Otherwise I'd have to probably look for its anus, and logically guess that it would be the same place as he entered, namely its mouth, and in this wilderness area, so sparse in actual place names, would there be a marker set to ignite my steadily smouldering half-theory into a veritable blaze? I was not hopeful, even though there was indeed a place name smack on the lips of that sprat, this being the initially meaningless Culliver Steps, because all that was there to give a name to was a few granite fording slabs placed across the rushing East Okerman River, although no more than a rushing stream, and which gurgles charmingly out of our sprat's mouth. But I reread that name, Culliver, a shiver went through me, as hidden within it was a name which had thrilled me years earlier when finding it written upon the wing of Libra's dove, and whose own shape is entirely formed by the Isle of Wight, White Dove. See my book's chapter on Libra. I'm talking of Culver Cliff, and Culver in Old English meant dove. Hang on a mo though, so why the bloody hell is the mouth of this Dartmoor sprat weirdly cooing out dove too? Okay, via man's ongoing repronunciation, spelling of a hitherto earlier form of a particular place name can produce certain oddities, but a fish cooing like a dove must surely mean that my cobbling together of a fisherman's tale on Dartmoor had suddenly become a laughable red herring. Such went my own thoughts, until that is, it hit me. You see, I suddenly remembered from some previous research that the Hebrew name Jonah meant dove, and in a graphic flash I was seeing the newly enlightened Jonah stepping out onto those fording slabs after his ordeal, simple stepping stones in the middle of nowhere yet seemingly now bearing stunning proof of something beyond belief, a 16-mile-long fish with Jonah a dove written upon its lips. And yet I still wanted more. Back I rushed to the book of Jonah to see what happened once the fish had vomited him back out onto dry land, and found, and the word of the Lord came unto Jonah the second time. With that I knew, again from previous research, that this word of the Lord sometimes took the symbolic form of a dove, And in another few seconds I was in amongst the Gospels of the New Testament, there being reminded that when Jesus came up out of the water after being baptized by John, the Holy Spirit of God came from heaven and descended upon him like a dove. Blimey, Jonah on Dartmoor was ludicrous enough, but I think you'll know where this is going now. I was thinking like, and was not even Jesus some 40 days in a wilderness after being baptized? A baptism followed by the word of God came and hovered, as a dove, above his head as a sign that he was ready, initiated even. So was Jesus' own testing ground likewise set amidst Dartmoor's own renowned wilderness, indeed, where a sign of a dove has been left to hover over the place of a fish's mouth, which gurgles with crystal clear waters, waters fit for the head of the Messiah himself. Okay, I know I'm pushing my luck, but to picture Jesus treading here too may actually prove slightly easier to swallow than Jonah's proposed visit, for there still remains in these parts that stubbornly persistent legend that Jesus as a youth came to this very area of Britain with his Uncle Joseph of Arimathea, and thus trod this starved giant of Pisces on his way to Glastonbury. Although it's said that the pair first made landfall at St. Michael's Mount, at the tip of this great Piscean tail, and thereafter continued by sea along its finned back so as to finally head inland via the wetlands which edged Glastonbury at that time, there to stay for a time, in that small zodiacally encircled sanctuary of the Druids, this the actual glassy eye of my all-enveloping Pisces, for to glean the wisdom they held. Certainly, the legends say that these wise men already knew exactly who he was, and had even foretold of his coming long before his first cry in Bethlehem, and thus duly welcomed him here to their renowned Glastonbury College of Learning with open arms. However, let's kick around another scenario. Certainly, this proposed sea route from St. Michael's Mount to Glastonbury would have avoided any legwork in slogging north through the wilds of Dartmoor, and seems entirely sensible. But could we also speculate that this youth, hence his coming all this way to Britain, knew already the great mirror of the heavens that had for some holy reason been ordained to shape this isle, and if so, and in first making landfall at St. Michael's Mount, of all places, knew too that the most potent ley line on the planet ran singing and dancing from there straight to Glastonbury. And this all along the very spine of Pisces? Therefore, could his route have been rather on foot along this energized track so as to be filled with the vibrations which may have at that time been even more alive than our present-day sensing understanding of the same, a 40-day wilderness trek along the ley-lined backbone of Pisces, from its tail to its Glastonbury eye, but stopping off halfway along, because this same ley line passes right through Dartmoor and its sprat, so as to be himself symbolically swallowed within Dartmoor's own swallowed fish within a fish, and thence, as any would-be initiate, to have his wits put through the spiritual mincer. And would he not have been attracted to this place knowing that Jonah had already done time here too? Boy, he would have gone there like a shot. Remember though, that ultimately only a loving and benevolent mind could have created this visually enchanting wonder beneath our feet, and thus for the successful self-illuminated initiate a very meaningful sign of a dove has already been stationed at that fish's mouth, exit in welcoming readiness. Simply magical. Or am I continuing to be silly? Whatever, allow me to meander on with stars in my eyes, for the truth of a youth named Jesus having once tarried here still sings from atop of two of Dartmoor's highest tors. Dartmoor is still today a place of great mystery, 3,000-plus-year-old standing stones, and circles shout out that the Druids had marked the whole area out as holy to both Sky Father and Earth Mother, and perhaps too to a boy called Jesus whom they knew would one day journey here. To them he was called Jesse, Jesus, and Isis, so read even to this day the names of two tors seemingly remembering his passage through this wilderness, two otherwise strange names which have via linguistic twists and turns come down through the ages so as to arrive now into this our new way of seeing, and so add their own voices to this unfolding wonder underfoot. I give to you then Hessery Tor, a tongue trying to pronounce Jesus. Another name for this same Tor being Isfother, yes Father perhaps. The other Tor being, wait for it, yes Tor, the second highest Tor on Dartmoor, and, yes, that Michael Ley goes straight to it. And with this another emphatic, yes, too to Blake's question of, and did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? Let us not forget either, that Jesus was indeed born under the sign of Pisces, and prior to the cross it was the sign of the fish which his followers used to mark their faith in him, and thus another enticing reason why, If Jesus did ever come to Britain, and knowing already its starry ground plan, that its own mighty fish of Pisces would be the magnet for his first port of call, his footsteps along its ley-lined backbone confirming the miraculous imagery underfoot. That said, I'm still a long way off from resting my case in my pursuance of a seemingly hard-to-believe possibility, because trust me when I say that the evidence still to come is as spellbinding as it is so crystal clear to see, even without having to first go to Specsavers. I now call Mr. Robert Graves as my next witness. In his book The White Goddess, he tells us that from ancient times the wise of both the East and West sought to extend the act of Genesis into a strange Earth calendar law whereby gods, planets, creatures, trees, along with a plethora of other strange bedfellows, were allotted to certain days of the week, and yes, it all gets a bit weird, but for us anglers standing at the mouth of Dartmoor's swallowed sprat, it's Thursday's listings which demand our careful scrutiny, as they include sea beasts, birds, and trees among its allocated oddments. So may I firstly tick off sea beasts as pertaining to both the great all-enveloping sign of our Pisces, and of course this sprat within its gut? Reasonable, I think, and so too my call for these culver steps, with a dove culver buried within its spelling, as addressing the need for a bird. As for trees, let me throw in that East Oakament River which pours out of our sprat's mouth, because surely there's an oak in there somewhere. I know, you're probably thinking that I'm here now grasping at any old straws going so as to build my case, but Thursday's shopping list hasn't all been ticked off just yet, for Graves also tells us that John the Baptist, and, wait for it, Jonah too belong to this same day, and I think in the context of what I've been proposing, and with us standing here before this landscaped sprat amid the entrails of Britain's Piscean sea beast, a sprat which gurgles out its stream of oaky oak tree themed water beneath the sign of a bird, a culver, a dove, well, these old straws might be more than just gold in color after all. But hang on, I'm still teasing, because Graves then finally reports that there is also a god allotted to Thursday, this the great god Bel, god of thunder and lightning, and he being one and the same with the Celtic sun god Belenus Belenus. So with us again gathered here at this sprat snout, look you now to the east and see that we are here, looked down upon by a towering crag, and which goes by the stunning name of Belstone Tor. Indeed this whole area which encompasses the head of our sprat is called Belstone Common, ding dong. Oh, and by that Michael line goes arrow-like to this tor too. And did I just say, arrow? Well, the Renaissance scholar Pierre Pitou told that the name Bel came from the Greek balus, meaning arrow. Oh, come on Graham, that really is grasping for a non-existent straw. I hear you say. Perhaps, but just keep this Grecian snippet in mind for later on. All fine and dandy, but you still haven't as yet threaded John the Baptist into this your Dartmoor tapestry of still hard-to-believe bump. Are you going to say that he too was a traveller with Jesus, and Joseph to Britain, and thus the perfect chap to baptize Jesus here at the Culver Steps? Because if you are, why then in that legend of Jesus' visit to these shores is not the presence of the Baptist himself never alluded to? And a damn fine question too. Jesus and John were indeed cousins, so perhaps not too great a leap of the imagination to see them both on board Uncle Joseph's ship, and yet if such were true I too would have thought John's arrival on these shores would have been fully recorded in that legend, but neither does this absence mean he categorically wasn't with that party of seafarers. However, let's say that he never came here, and that some high druid of these shores, one who knew, of course, this mystic floor plan of Britain, and who not only acted as a welcoming guide to these travellers from the East, but who also performed the actual baptism of Jesus, here on Dartmoor. Preposterous. Okay, but please hear me out. I can only put forth one name as to the druid who could have performed this baptism on British soil, and he the famous Taliesin, he of the radiant brow, chief bard, and seer of these isles, and remembered as such in the Mabinogion. Here is a character who would demand an entire book to fully do justice to, but for us looking for a homegrown Baptist, hear these words from out of his own prophetic mouth: I was called Johannes the Diviner, and Merdin, names which in the language of the mysteries meant John the Baptist, and Merlin. To vindicate this apparent boast, however, the Welsh triads themselves list Taliesin as one of the 3 baptismal bards of the Isle of Britain, the other 2 bearing the name of Merdin, Merlin, and all 3, one and the same bloke anyway. Thus, if Jesus was baptized here by the baptismal bard, Druid of Britain, one Johannes the Diviner, Merlin, by any other name, he was indeed baptized by Britain's own acting John the Baptist. As a point of interest here, we should note that the above-named Johannes is thought to be one and the same with the ancient Babylonian fish god Oannes, their teacher of all knowledge, a strange chap by all accounts, who was from the waist down a fish, a nightmare in trying to get around on dry land, although some stone carvings show him more likely to be wearing a fish costume. The fish's head becoming a helmet, while the god's face appears to be looking out from where the fish's mouth would be, and which to my artist's eye has the almost cartoon effect of giving the god the dramatic appearance of a man in the process of being swallowed, feet first, by a fish. Now I think you know again exactly where my thoughts are heading, but I'm not going there just yet. Getting back to Taliesin, some will rightly argue that history has him down as some misty bard of the 6th century, and therefore 500 plus years too late to have ever met Jesus. However, this dating of his verse is understandably based upon the earliest manuscripts that have come down to us, and although I'm no expert, I can't help but to ask if these pages are but later copies or remembrances of a far older body of work previously only ever orally passed down. Whatever the exact time when his verses were first voiced, here again Taliesin sing of himself the following: I have been with Noah in the ark, I have seen the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and this, I have been teacher to all intelligences, I am able to instruct the whole universe. I shall be until the day of doom on the face of the earth. Basically, this Welsh wizard is saying that there has never been a time when he hasn't been here, so a lying old big head, to boot. Yep, you could be forgiven for assuming such, but let's just keep on casting our fly, or better still, an acorn. Before we cast that new bait, however, I feel no one can argue that all 6 weird and wonderful items earmarked for Thursday have, and against all the odds, indeed been found to be provocatively gathered here at this lonely spot in the middle of nowhere, for a reason which just might be adding up to the possibility that this nowhere is a spectacular somewhere, and where another buried secret of Britain is now returning to the surface. Let's then flick our rod again, and plop that tempting acorn bait into this here East Oakmont River, for we've still not netted all that this little fish has to say for itself, and since we're fishing in Druidic territory, let's take a look now at their most revered of all fish, their salmon of knowledge, a fish which supposedly fed upon the fallen fruits of the tree of life, and if caught, and partaken of would impart all knowledge to that lucky fisherman. Now these fruits of the tree of life were said to be hazelnuts, but in other accounts it was acorns, thus marking this great tree of life as an oak, and of course a tree most sacred to the Druids. Thus with this new arrival in our net, and with us still standing here at the Sprat's mouth, note again the East Oakmont, Oak River which gurgles at our feet, sign that our Sprat has acorns at its lips. Before you answer, know that the all-enveloping Piscean sea beast, itself a veritable salmon of knowledge, which has itself swallowed this tiddler, has leading from its own mouth north of Glastonbury, on my Ordnance Survey map a dotted line, a very short remnant of the ancient Roman track known as the Fosse Way, and which, with me fishing for clues, I followed to where this fishing line of a track fizzled out, and there dangling on the end like an enticing bait, was Oak Hill. A name fit to freak out any fisherman angling for the salmon of knowledge. Brilliantly graphic or what? But this the greater salmon has seemingly swallowed this tinier Dartmoor version of itself for to accommodate a more focused 3-day stay for those in the know, thus salmon within, glorious salmon, and both dining on the acorns of knowledge. Surely a fish supper spiritually fit for any would-be initiate to feast upon and swallow for themselves, enlightenment, rebirth in a very graphic nutshell. But do excuse me, I think I hear someone at the door. Knock knock, who's there? It's me, Taliesin again, just wondering, and what with all this talk of swallowing the salmon stuff, if you've told the reader yet of my own, rebirth? No mate, but here goes. To cut a long story short, Taliesin started life as a very bog-standard little boy named Gwion, but who one day had the almighty cheek to go stick a finger into Ceridwen's famous cauldron of wisdom, a rebirth, no less, and to then lick said digit with much relish. Well, Ceridwen, being the goddess in her most frightening hag-like personification, got royally pissed off by this, and after a multi-shape-shifting chase she finally espies the thief disguised now as a grain of wheat. Via his taste of her liquor he'd got the magic to see, and swallows, yes, I said swallows, him, end of, you would have thought. However, and I guess much to her horror, after 9 months she gives birth to the little rotter again, I guess a rebirth of sorts, so promptly ties him up in a leather bag and lobs him into the river Dovey, get that Dove vibe again, so as to drown. But he doesn't, for the bag instead gets caught in a prince's salmon net, yeah, salmon, and when untied the babe speaks in miraculous and prophetic words of wonder. Naughty no-good Gwion had suddenly become Taliesin of the radiant brow. So nout but a kid's story then? You decide. But before you do get this, so important must this tale be in Britain's overall pictorial message, that her conscious bedrock has seen fit to stunningly sculpt the sign of Virgo as an animated depiction of Ceridwen actually reaching for that grain of wheat, and which in the next breath, because the land has willed it that her mouth is gleefully gaping wide open, she'll gulp down the blighter who was Gwion. Indeed, and as if to leave no one in any doubt that this is the Welsh goddess herself, this depiction of her fills the baulk of her homeland. And that Gwion come the bard Taliesin infused grain of wheat she reaches in glee for, well it's Bardsea Island, and no, you really couldn't make it up. See behold Jerusalem Virgo, and just smile. As for another druidic tidbit worthy of our consumption, note now, while reminding yourself that we're still standing here at the Sprat's nose, how that East Okermont River which is gushing from its mouth is met at this very same spot by another sparkling stream slanting in from the southwest, and this sudden joining of waters does indeed give our little fish a most perfectly pointed snout, indeed, a veritable arrowhead of a nose. I'll return to this feature of two merging waters shortly, but for now let's just add to our catch the strange name of the stream which clatters into the side of that East Okermont so as to create that arrowhead. It's the Blackhaven Brook, and in it an enticing reflection of the druidic word Oran. Now Mary Cain tells us in her book The Glastonbury Zodiac that to the Welsh Druids, the creative word of God could be sensed as a divine inspiration, this via a dialogue with the muse, and to this force of inner illumination they gave the name Oran. Furthermore, they symbolized this vehicle of inspiration as 3 bars of light in the formation of an arrowhead with a center shaft, and which Mary quite rightly saw as echoing a dove in its simple bird-like shape, thus the spirit word of God, encapsulated in this form of a dove, would mirror perfectly the imagery of that one which the Bible says hovered above the baptism of Jesus, and perhaps over Jonah too. Remember, Jonah being the Hebrew word for dove. Delightfully, Mary also informs us that the Druid pronunciation of Oran was Ahuan, perfect mimic of a dove's repetitive call. And so what better place for this dove-like inspiration to descend but on these Jonah the dove calling Culliver steps, with the Blackhaven a Blackhaven Brook offering one line, while the East Okermont scribes the other, in defining that sharp arrowhead of merging waters, and which in a grand economy of line likewise defines our fish's pointed nose. You might be thinking, however, why then is this Dartmoor Oran color-coded black rather than the more obvious dove white? Such a question bobbed up into my own mind, but was quickly answered by Mary Cain's own understanding that the word of God could be sensed as a divine inspiration, this via a dialogue with the muse, and muse to me means the goddess, the earth mother, and she's as symbolically jet black as that feminine left side of the yin and yang symbol. What's more, when exiting our Sprat's mouth you'll find this Blackhaven Brook rushing in from your left so as to greet you, while what must be now the more masculine Okermont, and hence coded white, will be on your right, so both of them in perfect yin-yang placement before joining as one in a perfect arrowhead before your very eyes, thereafter gushing onwards as one and the same water in a swirling liquid embrace so poetically befitting of that most fluid of logos. Still musing whilst we take our leisure beside these two enjoined waters, know that in my book I have said that Britain is a vast land mirror to the heavenly constellations, and therefore logical to surmise that even this little fish we found in the gut of Pisces should itself be expected to have its reflection above. Certainly, Pisces is the sign of the fishes, although nothing more than a hunch had me looking towards a somewhat lonely little fish which swims in the wake of those of Pisces, and which goes by the name of Pisces austrinus, the southern fish, although in Giuseppe Cesti's book The Glorious Constellations I found that it's also referred to as Pisces solitarius, and with that name, and seeing our Sprat caught amid the lonely wilds of Dartmoor, I was hooked. However, I hope you, like me, will swallow this starry candidate hook, line, and sinker when I tell you that the brightest star of this constellation is known as Fomalhaut, and its placement upon this starry sprat, just as those glowing Culliver steps are upon its earthly counterpart, is precisely upon its lips. And sure, I hoped like mad that there'd be something in the meaning behind its own Arabic name that would coo out, dove, too, but all I got was the mouth of the fish, oh, and the first frog, so no coo there, only a bloody croak lol. But on this my journey through land stars I've learnt to persevere, because if I was on the right track I always knew something else would eventually show up and have me whooping with delight. And in this case, something else did indeed turn up, thanks again to those druids, because I found that the star Fomalhaut was known to them and associated it with their goddess Brigid, goddess of the birthing time, midwifery, Dartmoor's midwife to the initiate's rebirth into enlightenment. And so too of sacred springs wherein it was said a small spotted fish would appear as sign of healing, and would that be spiritual healing prior to, or after enlightenment? The oak was also sacred to Brigid, likewise the so-called 9 white stones which were symbolic of the 9 virgins who attended her. Interesting, because just a 10-minute walk towards Belstone Tor, that Tor of the sun god Bel, the Grecian for arrow, you'll come across a circle of standing stones called the 9 maidens. Moreover, know also that Brigid was herself a sun goddess, thus her title of the fiery arrow, here at this watery arrowhead at the snout of our solitary sprat, along with thoughts of the oar and arrow glyph, and I think it's high time now for that whoop of delight, but wait. Guess which fellow the ancient Babylonians thought this same Pisces Ostrinus Solitarius represented? Well, don't guess, I'll tell you. One Oans, their fish god, and whom we've already met in the shape of Johannes John the Baptist. He in that theatrical costume which gave him the look of a guy being swallowed by a fish. And yep, we're right back to Thursday's magnificent shopping list, oh, and right back too to that man Taliesin, and who also said of himself, and it is not known whether my body is flesh or fish, so whoop with me now, but only if you feel like it. Surely there's now so many pennies dropping upon our heads at this solitary spot, on Dartmoor, that they're adding up to a very tidy little lottery win, but get ready, there follows another coppery cloudburst. But don't duck just yet, instead can we just for the fun of it try to visualize him now, he that once was caught in a salmon net, Taliesin, indeed, he the self-proclaimed Joannes Oans, and yes, of course playing the part of John the Baptist, stood waiting here at the mouth of his Babylonian-ordained constellation of Pisces Solitarius. Here gigantically landscaped in Dartmoor's wilderness, here waiting for the initiate to either enter or exit this most awesome of solitary confinements, this oval within an oval, this the so-called Jesus fish or vulva of the Virgin at the center of the Vesica Pisces, this indeed the salmon-scented vulva of the fiery arrow goddess herself, Brigid, to dare to dip a naughty Gwion-like finger into this her Dartmoor cauldron, wherein the essence of the salmon's knowledge swirls like the firmament, will be to either have her as both mother and midwife to one spiritual rebirth, or else in her other aspect of the hag Ceridwen would such a failed one have to flee screaming and quite insane, the astonishing truth of themselves being just too much to handle. Reckon Gwyn's own mantra must have been, "Fortune favors the brave." And isn't that really the nub of all of this? For are any of us brave enough to really see what's being presented to us not only here on Dartmoor, but upon the entire face of Britain? Have we the nerve to stick a finger in and to then suck it and see? Gwyn certainly did, and became in a flash the all-seeing, and seemingly immortal, Taliesin. Our own trials apart, however, let me say now that I personally couldn't give a monkey's as to whether it was a fish costume Taliesin, a fish called Wanda, or Michael Fish himself who did the officiating here, as I believe we've seen enough already to know that the real intrigue of this relatively tiny area of Dartmoor's vast expanse of wilderness is the inescapable fact that it has seemingly been done up as good as any old Vic stage set could be in readiness for the grand finale. And rightly so, for as with any initiation, whether within the inner sanctum of some temple, or here on a lonely moorland, the initiate would first be confronted by the place itself, by the visual effects laid out in preparation, and by the array of pertinent mystical signs and objects etc., all in position to firstly ignite the outer atmosphere, but then to instill a heightened sense of the inner spiritual journey, a test which the initiate is about to undertake. In a word, I'm talking theatre, and Dartmoor's curtains are here opening to reveal a stage set full of every conceivable prop possible, a multiplicity of signs from man-swallowing sea beasts to the watchful stares of a pagan god and goddess, and all to the effect that the intended performance here is to be one where the lead actor, initiate, is to be tested upon a mind-blowing scale, indeed, stood upon a stage which is itself a terrestrial mirror of the universe. Oh, and for worthy initiate look, a dove has been positioned in readiness to greet that fortunate one, the magnificently glittering sign of Jonah, so as to leave no one in any doubt whatsoever, that they are retracing the exact steps of both Jonah and Jesus upon this landscape, a landscape wherein the Orion is animated in every singing rock. However, let's tug these Dartmoor curtains open some more, because there's still more deftly positioned stage props for us to find and marvel at, and with them still more heaven-dropped pennies set to bounce off our sore bonces. Standing then at this sprat's nose where two provocatively named waters define an arrowhead, surely in sympathy with that arrow-like imagery of the Orion, and amid thoughts of an acorn-eating salmon of knowledge, our next inquiry should be, where exactly would a swallowed-down would-be candidate for initiation end up after passing through its mouth? Logically, I guess that after entering the mouth he'd head down some straight gullet-like pathway, until some prominent feature of the landscape would perhaps signal the prime location where such a candidate would have to give himself up to, whatever forces were about to put him to the test. Follow me then a mile and a bit down its gullet to where rises a prominent tor whose name, under the circumstances, immediately catches the eye, it's Okita, and with it a charming affirmation that our mini-salmon has already swallowed down a knowledge-bearing acorn, fresh fallen from off the tree of life, as already previously swallowed by the greater Pisces in the shape of that earlier mentioned okill nut, in readiness for such a knowing candidate to climb and stand upon, and there be tested as to whether or not they are worthy to truly dine upon this salmon within a salmon. And who'd be the judge of such a postulant atop of this dizzying crag? Well, because we're here within the veritable womb, that oval within an oval, of the many-faced goddess, I'd guess she'd first arrive in her guise of the wild and screaming hag Ceridwen, as with Taliesin, not wanting to give up her secrets easily. However, should that candidate survive the hallucinatory horrors of her testing ground, it would be the gentle midwifery of Ceridwen, now become Brigid, who would administer the final enlightenment rebirth. For a taster the nature of Jesus' own trials here, well, here just a snippet of the kind of stuff which was whispered into his own spinning mind at the top of this same crag. If you are the Son of God, he said, throw yourself down. Matthew 4 verse 6. Note, he said. So no feminine force doing the dirty work here then, as Matthew is certainly equating that voice of dangerous temptation as being male, indeed, as the devil's own. Thing was, however, that in the early years of the churches, and sometimes brutal, wiping out of the older religion of the earth, fertility goddess, it was part of their game plan to pretty well denounce all nature, especially an untamed wilderness, as the province of the horned and hoofed devil. That said, my own theory regarding the possible visits here of both Jonah and Jesus are all set in a time prior to any church scaremongering, and thus when the goddess was still highly revered. Indeed, in Sir Kelly's translation of the Gnostic book The Gospel of Peace of Jesus, and allegedly originally penned by the disciple John, it certainly shows that Jesus revered her too, for truly, no one can reach the Heavenly Father unless through his earthly mother. By the way, and just a passing thought here regarding Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness, it could be, if my theory is anywhere near being correct, that these 40 days were spent in trekking from St. Michael's Mount to Glastonbury, and maybe 3 of these days were set aside for to spend within that testing ground of this fish within a fish. I suggest this based upon the following strange morsel from the lips of Jesus himself. Here he is being grilled by some Pharisee scribes. But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall be no sign given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas, for Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Matthew chapter 12. Now could Jesus be here suggesting that Jonah, like he too will, or probably already had, spend 3 days in the belly of a whale, indeed this Piscean giant of Britain? So too, is there another hint in that heart of the earth, that the location for this whale is certainly not in any obvious ocean, but more likely Dartmoor's own encrypted version more equals C. Dart arrow or and dove something is definitely going on here. I know, my craziness seems to know no bounds. My only defense being that my theories are but born out of this series of colossal pictures found upon a landscape, and which themselves spark the gut feelings which, when sounded out against mythologies from around the world, have time and time again received astonishing, yet uncannily simple verification. And these verifications themselves, and always at a much later point in my research, finding confirmation in the very place names, which man has seen fit to drop exactly where they should be so as to spur on the thought lines which have birthed both my book and these articles. Admittedly, a not very scientific way to go about things, but a way, nevertheless, which has dug up things that a modern inquiring mind must sift through, for surely as humans we must take every opportunity possible to look beneath every single stone, no matter how outlandish in appearance, in effort to know exactly why we're all here, and let's face it, after thousands of years seeking for this same truth, billions of us today are still none the wiser. Perchance, if we for a moment drop our eyes from the stars above to these their reflections underfoot, we could find that the real truth of ourselves, and of our ultimate destinies, has always been waiting right beneath our stuck-up in-the-air noses in the shape of these land-crafted constellations underfoot. For myself, all this proof aplenty that we, and all creation, are not some accidental byproducts thrown out of an equally accidental Big Bang. To think otherwise is surely to think yourself as no more than cosmic detritus. Rather, I say, look you down, see that the stars have come down to our feet, you are not shit, you are God. Sorry for both my above digressing, and impassioned blast, but just be reassured that whenever we get overdosed on the head-whirling questions, which this extraordinary evidence on the ground seems to demand we try to unravel, it so often suddenly relieves our trepidations with a gem which prompts only a childlike joy, and which seems to say, smile, for you are indeed upon the right track. So laugh now, as I did when I first fell over it. Thanks Ordnance Survey, for that force which has created this whole miracle has, via millions of years worth of wind and rain, sculpted Okita, that acorn of knowledge in the gut of our acorn-eating mini-salmon of knowledge, into the astonishing shape of another fish. Yes, it's now a fish within a fish, within a fish. But this absolute joy does not end even here, because upon further studying the rest of this Dartmoor gut I found another 5 granite hard tores which, from a dove's eye view, have all been shaped to blow our tiny minds, another 5 tores, all fish-shaped tores beguilingly sculpted as little fishes, and thus now netting us a total of 7 fish within this astonishing gut of Britain's almighty Pisces. Copied from Ordnance Survey Outdoor Leisure Map 28. The only thing I can add to this, other than the fishy eyes I couldn't resist dotting in, is to say that whatever creative force has done this thing to Britain, it can surely only go by one name, that name being Love Divine. Lovely would it be for me at this delightful point to wrap up this my first article regarding my book's deleted revelations, but I feel the need to now invite King Henry III himself to the witness box in order to answer a few pertinent, and for me, still nagging questions. Across time, I send greetings to you, Your Majesty. May I firstly ask whether in sending out your 12 knights, were they Templars by any chance? To mark out your boundary upon Dartmoor you were simply doing what kings did, namely putting up "No Trespassing" signs so as to keep the riffraff out of your rich hunting grounds, and that fish shape they seemingly outlined being nothing but a charming coincidence. Do pray answer. The king looks dreamily to the ceiling while pulling upon his trim beard, but gives no reply. I then ask, or was it that this boundary perambulation was all along a ruse for to put off the scent of those who shouldn't know? Indeed, I put it to you that it was your intention all along to scribe out a fish, and this, because it had come to your attention via information given to you by your tutor Walter Map that in this, your zodiac sculpted realm, and within that belly of the greater fish, which is Pisces, was another very special fish-shaped enclosure. Moreover, this enclosure was of immense age and sanctity, for you had information that the Lord Jesus himself had found the ultimate self-illumination therein, and it was thus your wish to therefore have its contours again made clear for future generations to rediscover for themselves and know the truth, and wonder of its ancient pedigree? Again, the king fails to answer, but smiles warmly up to the gallery where Walter is seen to be trying desperately to control a bout of chuckling bordering upon a full-blown Norman wisdom-like laughter meltdown. In exasperation I finally ask, did you, or did you not know in advance that your knights would map out for you the shape of a fish in those wilds of Dartmoor? And yes, I know that the map they brought back for your safekeeping, and which is still in existence today, was no more than a basic circle, this owing to the rudimentary map-making skills of your day, no offense intended, but whose scattering of guiding place names they jotted down around the route of their 50-mile perambulation would, nevertheless, if joined up by a inked quill, present even to the eye of a child a fish shape of some 16 miles from snout to tail. Now what say you? The king's eyes again come to rest upon the gilded stars which decorate the ceiling of the courtroom, and get this, he begins to now whistle. Dixie, of all bloody things, I give up. Perhaps, however, I've been somewhat unkind to old Henry in the questions I've put to him, for it may be that he really didn't have a clue as to why his knights mapped out a fish, and really never noticed such anyway. I say this, and I can't underline this gut feeling enough, because it's been a strong suspicion throughout my digging and delving into this zodiacal landscape of Britain that many hands throughout time have all been guided, albeit knowingly so as to aid and abet this steadily burgeoning miracle under our noses, this from the chosen routes of their ancient footpath network, to the uncanny naming of places, for just like the Glastonbury Zodiac, these delightfully deft touches have, and against all reasonable odds, both embellished and underlined the presence of these my own green constellations. I have already mentioned the Suffolk town of Eye, which someone sometime felt the need to place exactly where I would, unknowingly at the time, place the Eye of Sagittarius. And who could not smile with me now when, as another example, I give the name of a mere hamlet situated on the edge of the Cumbrian Christ's right buttock, for it's called Nateby, and no, it meant nothing to me either, until I checked it out in an old English dictionary, and found Nate meant buttock, so Nateby equals by buttock. Exactly. On that giggling and totally innocent note, and because I think it's the duty of the author to give his own take on the possible meaning behind what he reckons he has found, and just as I've tried to do throughout my book, the last chap in the witness box is to be myself. Thus, I will now try, for what it's worth, to make a stab as to why so many fishes within a fish are apparently trying so hard to catch our attention, a stab, purely based upon my own humble reading of the pictures and place names which are spread so gigantically before us, in short, the very graphic evidence upon the ground. Simply put, I feel that these 7 fish within fish, delightfully akin to those Russian matryoshka or babushka dolls within dolls, dolls with a secret, must be prompting us, Jonah-like, to allow ourselves to be poetically, and fearlessly so, swallowed right down into the central spiritual nucleus of our own inner being, and to where, in a sense, that acorn of knowledge, this the divine truth of us, resides waiting for to ignite in us an almost orgasmic exclamation of sheer joy in the sudden and intimate understanding of the truth of our immortal being within this oh so conscious and loving universe. For look, even the bedrock of Britain is showing itself to be alive, knowing, and fabulously communicative. But how to get to that inner place where this our buried truth awaits? Maybe, just to quietly contemplate that which love has heaved up through the foundations of these British Isles might be catalyst enough to this cathartic moment? I don't know, either that, or we could all meet up at a certain magnetized spot on Dartmoor. LOL. This might stab at an explanation as to the possible meaning behind all those fish within fish is not, however, a million miles away from the guidance which Buddhism, and a host of other mystical teachings from time immemorial have given to us regarding the inner route to self-illumination. But I'm no guru, like Henry, I'm just a bloke schooled by a map, albeit one brought off a Waterstone's shelf, oh, and an artist's mad eye. My following articles are all geared to lead towards a mind-blowing, and real-time event. I will show photographic proof of some 14 years ago, and which will send shock waves through every damn thing we ever thought was, or wasn't possible. For myself, that which occurred adds up to the profound and final message behind all I've discovered. Join me next then upon the body of Cumbria's 48-mile-tall crucified Christ, see my book, for it's here where that which was to become the shock of my life had perhaps been lying in wait for me all my life, but which I had no idea of until a few months after my book was published, and when I went in person to visit him for the first time. Until then, GKGX.